You mean the most famous scientist in the world, Dr. Briefs?
Don't forget richest in the world. He's that too.
My goodness, dear, you're the richest man in the world? I didn't know that.
I wasn't really aware of it myself. Forgive me, Your Richness, I'm sorry.
Dragon Ball is the go-to anime for most people, or at least most people I know when they mention anime they grew up with. It's one of the highest grossing media franchises of all time, coming in just below Batman. It's something that's been talked about in the anime community before, but today we're taking a look at one of the longest running characters in the show, Bulma Briefs, to figure out just how rich she actually is. But before we get ahead of ourselves, subscribe down below if you like this video, want to see more like it, and follow me on Twitter at 10kbill to yell at me about anything I may have missed and to suggest any video ideas you might have. And consider this your official spoiler warning for everything up to the latest Dragon Ball movie. Now before we really get into this, let's talk about the money that's used in the Dragon Ball universe, Zenny. The most obvious currency to compare it to would be yen, the currency used in Japan. Now unfortunately, we have conflicting evidence of how much yen a Zenny would actually be worth, with both of these coming straight from Akira Toriyama, the author of Dragon Ball himself. In another one of his works, Jocko the Galactic Patrolman, he writes that a Zenny is worth 1.5 yen. In Dragon Ball Super Exciting Guide, he states that 1 Zenny equals 1 yen. For simplicity's sake, we'll be doing a 1-to-1 exchange rate for the two, but this will just be for one part later on in the video. For my sake and yours, I'll be working in US dollars for the bulk of this, because even then, the numbers get pretty stupidly high, and if we're working in yen the entire time, they would be insane. Now let's finally talk about the Capsule Corporation, and in order to do that, we need to focus on Dr. Briefs, Bulma's father and the company's founder. He founded the company in age 712, which is how the Dragon Ball universe handles their years. While we don't have an exact date as to when Dr. Briefs created the capsules that are featured so prominently throughout the series, it's a safe bet to assume that they would be created right around the founding of the company. I mean, why else call it Capsule Corp? So let's talk about how we're figuring out how much money the Briefs family is making from their company. For starters, we'll have to find a company to try to compare Capsule Corp to. One thing we know about the company is that not only have they created this amazing new technology that can shrink anything down to an itty-bitty capsule, they also created much of the various items they sell via capsule form. We've seen them sell homes, cars, rice cookers, submarines, airplanes, weapons, and a ton more. The vastness of the items that the company sells leads me to believe that the closest actual company to compare it to would be Amazon. Let's take a look at some Amazon numbers. Amazon has 501 million outstanding stocks as of late 2018. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, at the end of 2018 owned 78,880,000 stocks himself, which is 15.74% of the company. That year, he made a reported $78.5 billion. However, I think that Dr. Briefs owns a much larger portion of the company, considering that he lives at the headquarters and never really has to run any of his or his daughter's huge purchases past anyone. We'll be estimating that he has kept 90% of Capsule Corp, with the other 10% going to various early investors. 15.74 to 90 is an increase of 471.79%. We'll take Jeff's income and increase it by that much, bringing it to $370,355,150,000 each year. Now we can talk about how we're doing our math. We'll be taking Dr. Brief's salary for each year, we'll be applying Japanese taxes, because it is a Japanese show, take 99% of whatever's left after that and have him put it into a bank account. With him and his family living off of just 1% of their money, which is still more money than most of us will ever see in our lifetimes, a bit over $2 billion each year. I don't think that Dr. Briefs is actively investing any money, because at one point we see him mention that he really isn't aware of how much money he even has. And before we go too much further, let's talk about some of the different inventions we see the Briefs family create throughout the series. The majority of the inventions are typically used for one-off jokes before being forgotten about completely. I don't think that many of these inventions, if any at all, would make it to market, and thus won't be taken into account for this video. From this point onward, we can kind of fast forward through a bunch of years. Eventually, Dr. Briefs would marry, and his wife would give birth to 2 daughters, Tights, and eventually Bulma, who was born in age 733. Financially, there really wouldn't be any changes with the birth of his daughters because of the sheer amount of money that they're living on. By this point, the Briefs would have $4,463,103,247,901. Now we can fast forward through a bunch of years again. In age 749, Bulma finds a Dragon Ball tucked away in a closet, creates a device that can track the other Dragon Balls, and sets off on her journey, officially marking the start of the Dragon Ball series. At this point, the Briefs would have $7,708,996,519,101.90. Throughout Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, Bulma does spend a ton of money, but not in a way that would make a solid-sized impact. At least not until the tail end of the Saiyan saga in Dragon Ball Z, which would be age 762. This year, Bulma, Krillin, Gohan, and eventually Goku fly to Namek in 2 separate spaceships. One of these is a fixed-up Namekian spaceship, and the other is a custom spaceship built and designed by Dr. Briefs himself. According to NASA, a spaceship from about 20 years ago cost around $1.7 billion. However, the spaceship that Dr. Briefs built and designed in less than a month somehow is much, much more complex than what we currently have available. We'll be bumping that spaceship cost up significantly to $10 billion. They also fix up the Namekian spaceship. This spaceship is already capable of traveling across the solar system in mere minutes, so they wouldn't need to do a ton to it. We'll be having them spend $500 million on it. This spaceship also includes some technology that we'll see throughout the rest of the series. The most iconic of these being the gravity training rooms, which they end up building in their own home after Vegeta moves into their building later that year. We'll be taking off $1 billion each year to try to account for Vegeta getting mad at someone being slightly stronger than him and destroying the machine. For the next year, the Briefs would home the entire remaining Namekian race. However, they wouldn't need to feed any of the Namekians because Namekians need only water to survive. Eventually, the Namekians are wished to a new planet, the aptly named New Namek, and the Briefs family returns to what they consider normal. Aside from the yearly $1 billion that is being spent on training for Vegeta, that's the last major purchase from the Briefs family in Dragon Ball Z. From here, we can fast forward ahead to the beginning of Dragon Ball Super, which takes place technically between the defeat of Majin Buu and the time skip that occurs in the final episode of the series. So in age 778, we see Bulma's birthday party taking place on a huge cruise ship, which she would lend to Android 17 a few years later. The most expensive cruise ships in the world cost close to $1.4 billion. We'll actually be upping that a bit to $2 billion, which we'll have Bulma buy that year. Then, in age 780, Goku inadvertently kickstarts a cross-universal survival tournament. Though to be fair, if he hadn't, several universes would have been destroyed. In the anime, Goku decides to tell the people he's recruiting to his team that each member of the winning team gets 10 million Zeni. This helps him to recruit his team, though they do eventually learn that the fate of the universe is on the line. I think that after learning this, only 4 fighters would actually still take the money, with Bulma stepping in to foot the bill. Those fighters being Krillin, Androids 17 and 18, and Tien. The others would be fine with just saving the universe. The 40 million Zeni comes out to the equivalent of $368,320. Later in that same year, we see Goku and Vegeta training on a private island that Bulma bought before they fly off to confront Frieza and eventually Broly. A private island of a similar size can cost around $160 million. Because of the resort that Bulma builds on the island for herself so she can relax while the others train, we'll up that number to $200 million. And that's kind of where we'll end our math, where the anime currently is. At this point, the Briefs have $13,966,214,336,733.50. Bulma would likely get half of that, with the other half going to her sister, and would be subject to Japanese inheritance tax, which gives Bulma, at the current place in the anime, a total of $3,142,398,231,840.03. Though to be fair, if she ever wanted more money immediately, she does have a radar that leads her to some wish-granting Dragon Balls. Although, while doing some research, I realized that Bulma never actually makes a wish herself at any point in the series. But anyways, this has been 10K Bill, and thanks for watching. If you like this show and want to see more of it, consider supporting us on our Patreon. You can even get your name up on the screen. Comment down below what you'd like to hear me talk about next, and make sure you subscribe for all your entertainment-related content.